Good afternoon. I know the toughest session is always after lunch because you guys are all full and about to fall asleep, so I'm going to try and keep you guys awake. I think VR is a pretty exciting topic, and hopefully by the end you will also think so as well. This technology has been talked about for quite a bit, particularly the last few years. A lot of people have heard about VR AR, but I think very few people actually fully understand it. Even at lunchtime, I talked to some of the attendees here, and I got a sense that there's still a lot of misperceptions or misconceptions about what VR is and what AR is and how it's going to impact us. So that's what I'm going to talk about. And most people think of VR as a gaming tool, and that's all it's good for. What I think you'll find at the end of this presentation is that you understand that this technology is actually going to be the main interface we use to interact with all the other people in the world and all the machines that we have in our lives. So I have three people to thank for having the opportunity to be here today. One is my father, who in 1980 helped us to emigrate from China to the US, and he gave me a very important thing. He gave me purpose. He said, we moved away from China to give you guys an opportunity to do something different and to make an impact on this world. And I heard that, and I kind of been pursuing what I can do to impact the world as much as possible over the last 37 years. In 1991, I was able to study with Tom Furness, who is the father of VR, and studied and worked on VR for over 50 years, starting from the US Air Force. And then 2 years ago, I was able to work with Sher Wang, who is the chairman of HTC, who invited me to join HTC and pursue this mission of bringing VR to the masses. So our mission as a company is actually to unleash human imagination from the limitations of reality. Essentially, it's not about selling devices, it's not about making money, it's really about changing the world. And we've built 4 different divisions, from hardware to software to store to investment arm, to make sure that this happens as quickly as possible. Over the last 2 years, we've released 3 different products that are now the best and leading products across the world. In 2016, we released the Vive original Vive PC version, and it's won every single award for the last year and a half since it's released. In 2017, end of 2017, we announced this particular product called the Vive Focus. It's the first 6 degrees of freedom standalone device that doesn't require a PC, doesn't require a phone for you to get into high quality premium VR, and you can walk around. And then at CES just a couple weeks ago, we announced the Vive Pro, which is the high-end, kind of the Maserati of VR devices. And this device will be shipping this quarter. So no matter what your application is for VR, we have the right product for you. Not only that, having the right hardware doesn't matter if you don't have the right content. And so we've also built the Viveport, which is a custom content store to enable people to find the best experiences in VR. There are now over 2,000 titles made for these devices. And a lot of people think it's only games. Actually, more than half of these titles are non-gaming. And then for the investment side, we've actually built the ViveX incubator, which is in 5 cities, $100 million that we've dedicated to helping seed companies and early stage companies in VR. We've invested in over 90 companies in the last year and a half. We're the most active VR AR investor in the world. We then also created the VRVCA, the Virtual Reality Venture Capital Alliance, putting together over 50 venture capitalists from around the world to be able to support a healthy growth in the mid to later stage process, accounting for over $18 billion of investable capital. And then last week, I just announced that we have now opened up our Premier Venture Fund, which is a 1 billion RMB fund done with the Chinese government specifically towards VR and AR investments. Now, over the last 30 some odd years, I've been lucky enough to go through the several cycles of technology, the PC revolution, the web revolution, the mobile revolution, and now having an ability to play a part in the VR revolution. And in each of these, the key interfaces have changed. What made the PC something interesting was that it went from punch cards to keyboards, allowing anybody at home to be able to interact with a computer. And then came the web, and then came the Windows interface that allowed people who didn't know how to type and had a mouse interface to be able to interact with a PC. And then the web came, and then links, hyperlinks, was the purpose and the way that people got to access all the other information that's available on the internet. And then about 10 years ago, touch screens came. So a piece of glass was what your key interface is. Now, I think that the new metaphor of what we're going to use, all of these you can see are all very home and kind of construction related. The new metaphor I like to introduce is in the VR side. It's actually not in any of these, it's got a door. Because all the things in the past, you've been outside of that window, trying to look outside, see something through a screen. But what happens with VR is you actually get to open that door and you walk out. You walk into that virtual world environment of whatever you want to be in. And it happens instantly. So, but speaking of screens though, I wanted to introduce a little concept of how screen has evolved over the last 100 years or so. Before 100 years ago, there was really no such idea of screens. But then in 1895, the first movie came. And actually, the first film was one of a train running into the theater, and people started screaming coming out of the theater because they thought it was a real thing because they've never seen a movie before. That was the first screen that became a part of our lives. But then over the next 100 years, we've been adding more and more screens, from TVs to computer screens to phone screens, and now, and then to tablet screens, and then now to VR screens. Now, over the next 50 years, I think it actually goes the other way. What happens is that we start replacing each one of these screens with our VR, AR devices. And life becomes simpler, because at the end of this process, you will just have one device on your head that replaces every single screen you have in your lives today, and it does it better than anything that you've ever used before. And it's always on, and it's always helping you. Now, it goes much more beyond screens. I think VR, a lot of people think it's just a screen. It's actually just a surrounding you, a 360 screen. That's actually not the only piece. That's a very important piece. But there's also the audio side. There's the tactile side. There's the heat. There's the eye tracking. There's even this machine on the top right is a sense for your nose, so you can actually smell the place that you're going to. And all these companies are ones that we invested in. Another interface that's going to be very important for us that's related to VR is BCI, brain-computer interfaces. That allows you to think about things, and then it happens by looking at the signals that come out of your brain. That's also another company that we've invested in. So what VR is going to do is that it will then take all of your senses and bring it into one device. Whereas before, all of these things used to be different devices for you. We've never had a device that allowed you to actually encompass full brain interaction, full body interaction. So, but VR ultimately will become something that we actually do every day. Because every night we go to bed and we dream, and we actually enter a virtual world. If you think about that experience, that's where the ultimate potential of the experience for VR, the user interface for VR is that you get and you go into a dream, and it feels as real until you wake up. But when you're in the dream, you actually don't know you're in the dream. That's really where, when VR gets to the quality that we're looking for, ultimately, that's what it's going to be. Now, short term, 2018, I think there's 6 things that I've noticed that will be impacting the industry's growth in a very short term. I just spent the last week or so at CES, and some of the key trends that I found are these. One is the all-in-one product. Having an all-in-one product changes completely the way we interact with VR. In the past, we've always had a wire, or we had to stick a phone into it, and there's a lot of friction. Now, with a device like this, you put this headset on, it takes 2 seconds, like this, and that actually the speaker started going on, and it knew I was there. So you're in the VR world in 2 seconds. That's frictionless VR. Right? That's the beauty of what this brings, and to be able to have that will make it available to a different set of marketplace that was never accessible before. Before, you had to be a computer geek or a gamer who had a high-end PC at home and then know how to set it all up, and every time you go in, you have to recalibrate. You don't have to do any of that. 2 is dual lens cameras, both dual lens cameras on phones, as well as the ones that are specifically made for 180 or 360 capture. Because that then multiplies the amount of video content that's available that allows people to interact with these devices. 3 is AAA games. That's something that people have been looking, or AAA content in general, actually. That's something that people have been asking for a long time. And in the last quarter of 2017, there was a number of major titles that came out, from LA Noire to Fallout to Skyrim. And going forward this year, there's going to be a ton more. Companies that have been making billions of dollars on the PC game side or mobile game side are now directing their efforts to creating VR content. 4K screens are now becoming something that is real. I saw some demos of micro displays that are 4K, and you can do it 4K per eye. It becomes almost indistinguishable from the real world that we see. 5G networks is something that we'll actually be starting deploying for trials sometime in the second half of this year. In China specifically, the government has forced every single carrier to deploy significant trials in a large number of cities by the end of this year. And with 5G, you have all the latency issues removed, you have all the bandwidth issues removed with having cloud-based VR. That means that these devices won't be that size anymore. You can get down to more like glasses size, because all the processing is happening in the clouds. And all you need to do is to do the display and the tracking. 6DoF video. A lot of people may not understand what that means, but usually we watch a movie and we look at it, it's on the screen, and you're an audience. But what 6DoF video does, 6 degrees of freedom video does, is it allows you to walk into the movie, walk into the film. And I was able to demonstrate some of this technology, or try out some of this technology recently, and I was blown away. The realism you have when you're in the movie, it's so much different. And here's an example of a movie that is going to be coming out in about a month and a half. It's called Ready Player One. Can we turn the sound on?
To find the egg hidden inside
Ready Player
the
One
oasis.
is directed by Steven Spielberg, and it's a movie specifically about how VR is going to impact our lives in the next 20 years. It's about a story of a kid who lives in a world where VR is his only interface to the world. It's how he works, how he learns, how he lives, how he makes friends. And even though it's fictional, it's something that I think will allow people to understand what VR's potential is. That's something I think is the biggest barrier today in this industry. It's not the hardware, it's not the software, it's the understanding from the masses of why they need VR. And this movie educates hundreds of millions of people. So when that happens, when we start having a world like that, we have to ask ourselves some things. Things like, what is a conference? We're living right now in a conference here where there's hundreds of people sitting, and there's somebody on stage and they're talking, and they all have to be in the same place. A week ago, I launched this product in Shenzhen in this room. And when I did it, we had all the people in the room also wear VR glasses. I was on stage, and you could see that you could play videos on it, you could write on the board, you could speak to the audience, and the audiences were all wearing VR headsets. Not only that, we invited remote guests from other cities, so that lady on your left, in the pink, she was actually from Beijing, dialing in to interact with us on stage. And I had, wireless PC VR. The guy next to me had this all-in-one VR. So we mixed devices, remote locations, in and off location with a simulated full room. I mean, that's something that has happened already last week. So this is not the future. This is today. And the view I saw when I looked back was the audience in VR. And it looked a lot like what I'm looking at today. In fact, there was a glass mirror on the back of this, if you can see, that I could see myself moving inside on stage in that virtual room. And that room matched exactly the environment I was physically in. So it was very freaky, kind of metaverse freaky. Now, what this then makes us question is, so do we really need things like offices anymore? Every day I spend an hour each way commuting from my home to my office. If I could put on a headset and have an experience like that with all of my staff, do I really need to live in a city where I have to fight to commute? Can I just live on an island on the beach and be able to work and be as productive? Probably. And then we ask ourselves, what is a classroom? Do we need to have our kids go into a classroom, and particularly where there's good teachers? That's one of the most limited assets out there, or commodities out there, is high-quality teachers. If we can make high-quality teachers available to any student, anybody can attend Harvard or MIT or Stanford, Wouldn't that be wonderful? And that's happening today, where we are enabling schools to use VR to allow their teachers to take their kids on virtual field trips every class, not just once a quarter they get to go outside. They can put on this headset to do a virtual experiment. They can go into space. They can go to Mars. They can go under the water. They can go to the top of Himalayas. We just released some study last week that showed VR significantly improves memory and retention across all kinds of different metrics, right? So when you use VR, you're learning with your full body. We've released data last year that showed C students became A students when they started learning in VR. Not only are they improving their test scores, but they can also improve their sports performance. This is a study we just did with the Sports Ministry of China, working with the national youth soccer teams. So they had 4 youth soccer teams that are already at very, very high levels, use VR to do strategic training. And if you see the group on the left was with VR, before VR and then after VR, it grew by 35% in performance of their strategic response. The same set of teams on the left side, on your right side, after that month of training, only grew by 5%. So that's a 7x improvement in terms of for students that are already performing at ultra high level, they can still do that much improvement in terms of their quality of their strategic thinking. What is art? We've recently spent a lot of money investing and supporting galleries around the world to utilize VR and art together. In China alone, in the last month, we've actually done 2 art shows, one allowing a PCVR to walk in this virtual maze, a glass maze, with our wireless device, and then one on the right is Edison Chen. He's a kind of celebrity in the area where he released his latest VR art and a music performance using our devices. In fact, medicine, we talked about medicine in earlier sessions. This is something that, I think can be hugely impactful. And VR can be something that has 0 side effect, but can impact our lives significantly. On the left, surgeons are training and practicing their surgeries before they do it. You can use it to help you relax, to reduce stress. If you look at the chart on the bottom left, that's pain levels of people with and without VR. And if you see, it's significantly reduced in terms of the amount of pain that person's suffering. It can be used to reduce loneliness. Putting a elderly person into a VR goggle can improve their mood for an entire month. We've shown sustained pain relief for chronic pain users for months and months by having just a few sessions inside a VR device. So over time, this is going to be mass adopted. When I say mass adopted, what do I mean? I mean, when you have 5 billion people in the world using it, one of the earlier speakers said in a few years we're going to have 10 billion people. Well, at least half of them are going to be using VR very, very soon. Here's a device that everybody uses that there are about 5 billion people in the world using today. Anybody know when this device was invented? I'll give you the answer. 600 AD. Anybody know where it was invented? It was actually invented in China. So this is kind of ironic because here's another device that has similar numbers of users but costs about 100x more, is this device. It took 1,000 years for the toothbrush to get to about, over 1,000 years to get to 5 billion users. It's taken 10 years for the smartphone to get to about 5 billion users. Now, what's the next device that is going to do this? Something that actually would perform and have more value than all the prior devices is a immersive AR, VR device. Something that will combine the 2 technologies you wear all day, and it makes you super intelligent, and it makes you super capable. Given that now you know what's going to happen in the next 10 years, how will you prepare yourself and your children for this new reality that we're going to be living in? All right, thank you very much. Hopefully this was a useful presentation for you.